contemplating climate action in Washington state. Lawmakers in Olympia are debating controversial bills to set new clean fuel standards and transition to 100% carbon-free electricity by the year 2045.
It is more important than ever that states step up.
But critics are pushing back.
We're going to have zero impact on world climate based upon actions taken here in Washington.
After 2 failed attempts at the ballot box, will the state legislature find consensus on ways to reduce carbon emissions? How will the effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation fuels affect your pocketbook?
It's a progressive, low-cost, equitable policy
that's estimated to add up to 71 cents to the cost of gasoline.
And can all electric utilities wean off fossil fuels in 20 years?
States around the country are passing these standards. Some utility rates will probably go up.
Our 2 panels of experts weigh in, balancing the benefits and costs of going greener in Washington. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Caan. Washington voters have rejected 2 carbon reduction initiatives in the past 3 years. So why are state lawmakers pushing an ambitious environmental agenda this session? Supporters of clean fuel legislation, a carbon-free electrical grid, and other green goals say, in a fast-growing state that's seeing federal cuts to environmental protection programs, the time for climate action is now. But opponents say Washington is already one of the top clean energy states in the U.S., and adding new regulations on carbon pollution will hurt local consumers and businesses. The battle lines are familiar, but the balance of power has shifted in Olympia firmly to the Democrats, who now will put their bold environmental proposal to the test. In his run for president, Washington Governor Jay Inslee is hoping his agenda to fight climate change can reach a national audience.
Climate is changing. Reduce carbon pollution.
But he has to succeed with it at the state level first.
It's the moral, the policy, and the business issue of our time.
What is this going to cost the average citizen?
We're establishing a policy to reduce the greenhouse gas intensity.
The environment matters. Our customers matter. Please help us find that balance.
Inslee's 5-part environmental plan, from carbon-free electric utilities to new clean fuel standards, is under scrutiny in Olympia right now. And Senator Reuven Carlisle says it's time for action.
So we have 2 bills today.
Carlisle, the Democrat from the 46th District in Seattle, chairs the Senate Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee.
We got to make big progress this year.
Carlisle is hoping to find consensus on 2 of the most contentious bills stemming from the governor's agenda. A measure to create a 100% carbon-free electrical grid in our state within 26 years, and a proposal to reduce pollution from transportation fuels. The Clean Fuel Measure, substitute House Bill 1110, would require the production of more biofuel with lower carbon output than petroleum-based fuel, and would help our state meet a requirement set by the legislature to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 25% below 1990 levels by the year 2035.
But we cannot meet our goals without state action.
Supporters of the bill point out that transportation fuel is our state's largest pollution source, an issue that affects all of us.
We need deep decarbonization strategies across our transportation sector. The one thing that people of Washington really believe is that everybody's got to do their part.
Ranking Republican Senator Doug Erickson isn't buying in on the need for cleaner fuel standards.
I guess it's a noble goal, but it's one that's very difficult to get to. And the cost to the individual consumer, what will that be at the end of the day?
Critics say California's clean fuel standards, enacted a decade ago, have added 16 cents per gallon to the cost of gas.
We can expect the same results in Washington. We already have the 3rd highest gas prices in the country.
Erickson points out that state voters soundly rejected carbon fee and tax initiatives in 2016 and 2018 that would have added to fuel costs. He says the effort to incentivize drivers to use cleaner running vehicles would not be fair.
The person driving a F-150 will be subsidizing the person who goes out and buys a Tesla.
We are price sensitive, we are cost sensitive.
Carlisle says balancing costs and benefits are a major part of the state Democrats' environmental agenda, including engrossed substitute Senate Bill 5116, to create a 100% carbon-free electrical grid by the year 2045.
This bill has literally been years in the making.
Advocates say bringing in more wind and solar power as part of Washington's energy grid could boost the global fight against climate change, which in our state would have a wide socioeconomic impact.
That's central to our quality of life and touches on asthma, touches on the hundreds of millions of dollars a year we're spending every year on forest fires. It's all interconnected.
It'll have absolutely zero impact on world climate.
Erickson says other states and countries need help, not our state, which already produces 75% of its energy from renewable, non-carbon emitting sources like hydropower.
Whatever this committee can do to make it equal or fair, that's what we're asking for.
Local public utility districts are concerned tax breaks for wind or solar power could take away support from our state's strong but aging hydro system, and Erickson agrees.
We have a clean system already. If we increase taxes, make energy more expensive, what's going to happen is families will have less money to spend and jobs are going to move to other states and other countries.
Clean energy and fuel, green incentives for agriculture, construction, and more make up a 2019 climate action agenda that advocates say is crucial at a time of dwindling federal environmental support.
It is more important than ever that states step up.
But even with Democrats in control of the state Senate, House, and governor's seat, the debate over climate change is about to get a bit hotter.
We can always try to do better, but we shouldn't punish the people of Washington state by trying to reach these artificial goals that people are talking about.
Well, you're going to get two panel discussions for the price of one this week. We're going to talk first about low-carbon fuel standards in our state legislature, what's happening there. And to talk about that, we have with us Greg Rock. He is policy chair of Carbon Washington. We also have Dana Bieber of Affordable Fuel Washington. Very good to have you both. Let's get right to it. Greg, big picture first here. This fuel issue, perhaps the most contentious of the 5 climate-related proposals from the governor. A lot of people concerned this could increase gas prices, hurt consumers, businesses too. Why do you support this, House Bill 1110?
Well, first off, I mean, this clean fuel standard is a very economically efficient, effective, well-written policy. And so that's the main reason we support it. At Carbon Washington, we're very concerned about efficiency. We want to get carbon reductions, but we don't want to be a tax on the economy. We want to do it in a very economically efficient way. And because this is technology agnostic, we're not saying you need to go buy this or that. Instead, we're saying we want an outcome. We want cleaner fuels. We want less pollution from our fuels. And then the marketplace is allowed, there's a trading mechanism built into it. So it roughly approximates the efficiency of a carbon tax, which is the most economically efficient way to address carbon reductions, as well as local air pollution, any pollution problem. Right. It's more efficient to kind of tax what you don't want than it is to subsidize what you think you might want.
Okay, and I'm going to break down some numbers with you, Dana, if I can here. So the state legislature set this goal about a decade ago to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our state 25% below 1990 levels by the year 2035. Pause. Here's the other number. When it comes to carbon pollution in Washington, the legislature says 43% of that comes from transportation fuel. So if we're going to reach those goals, then the state is saying something has to be done with reducing emissions.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's one thing we can all agree upon is that we want to reduce our carbon emissions in the state of Washington. But the problem with House Bill 1110 is it's modeled after a California fuel policy that is a failure. It has increased It's added 16 cents a gallon to the cost of gasoline, and yet there hasn't been any significant reductions in carbon emissions due to this fuel policy. So why would we take a failed fuel policy from California and implement it here? And in fact, the legislature at two other years has looked at a fuel policy such as this and wisely rejected it. And that's what deserves to happen here. We need to instead find policies that will significantly reduce carbon emissions, but not put the cost squarely on the backs of Washington families in the form of higher costs of gasoline.
Okay, thank you for that. And Greg, let's work on some responses here. The California example is one piece of this. I know voters in our state, I-732 in 2016, 1631 just last year, really did have these concerns. You heard those a lot, I'm sure, with regard to we're going to have some higher prices at the pump. Help me out with this, because I think trying to align what the public has been voting for and what the legislature is doing right now can be a challenge. Help me out, please.
Yeah, well, first I just want to say, the policy in California is working very well. It's not a failure by any accords. They've had dramatic reductions. They're well on pace to achieve the reductions that are in statute through that policy. And it's not just California. We also have a low-carbon fuel standard in British Columbia. There's a clean fuel standard in Oregon. Yeah. So we are really the only state on the West Coast that doesn't have this policy. And as a result of that, we're actually losing jobs to all of our neighbors. Because if you're a biofuel manufacturer and you're trying to produce a clean fuel, why would you sell it here in Washington when you could sell it in Oregon and make more money? And so we've seen companies like Propel pack up their bags and their equipment and their jobs and move them from Washington State down to California because they initiated a low carbon fuel standard.
Yeah.
So I really think this is a jobs bill. And so while there are potentially some costs that could go up at the gas station, we're seeing dramatically greater savings across the board in the new jobs creation. There's a state study that said there'll be nearly 10,000 new jobs per year at the midpoint in this policy, as well as just all the health benefits. I mean, local air pollution is a very significant issue, especially here in the dense area of the King County, and especially the really disenfranchised communities that are exposed to all that local particulate matter, sulfur dioxide is causing asthma. And this low carbon fuel standard gets at all those different pollutions, not just carbon pollution.
Thank you for bringing that up. And Dan, I want to try to tackle this piece that Greg just talked about with regard to this missing market. British Columbia's got something going on. Oregon, California, all of them had this carbon fuel standard in place. And this argument is, if House Bill 1110 passes, we'd see a lot more development in our renewable energy sector, job growth, et cetera. It could be a boost for the economy. How do you look at that?
That is certainly not the case in California. It's been a failure in the state of California. In fact, the California Legislative Analyst's Office, and that's a state agency that provides policy and budget guidance to the legislature, they suggest eliminating the low carbon fuel standard in the state of California. They said if the legislature is not going to eliminate it, they need to significantly modify it. The LAO, Legislative Analyst's Office, also said it's 10 times more costly than the cap and trade policy in the state of California. And a study by the University of California, Davis, says that it's only reduced carbon emissions by a little over 1%. It is a failing policy. In fact, it's been such a failure, they've had to change the goals and the standards for it numerous times. It's only 25% implemented, and yet it's still adding 16 cents a gallon to the cost of gasoline. And that's estimated, that's just now. That's estimated to add up to 71 cents to the cost of gasoline. So why would we take this failed policy? You also mentioned Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon also has just started it,
That's right.
but they have had to change their goals already because they can't implement it properly. It's a failed policy, and it's why the legislature has rejected it 2 times, and it's why it deserves to be rejected again now.
With regard to that idea of job growth, though, just to answer that question, could you not see as a more unified West Coast bloc having that situation here where more jobs could come in from this type of sector if a standard like this was put in place?
Well, what they found in California is there just isn't sufficient quantities of biofuels available.
Okay.
I think we all agree that that is definitely part of the solution, that's part of the future, but there just isn't the significant, sufficient quantities that we need to make this program work. And if it can't work in California, which is the 6th largest economy in the world, how could it work in a much smaller state like Washington? It's proven to be costly, unworkable, and unfair.
Greg, I know you touched on this. Was there anything you wanted to respond to there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's really being mischaracterized. There's a few things thrown around there. One, the office, the LAIO, that's a part of the legislative branch. That's not the administrative agency, the California Air Resource Board, that runs this program. They are proponents of it. They want to see it expanded. The standards did just get changed. They got expanded. It's no longer a 10% standard. It's a 20% reduction. So California is strengthening it. And she said there was only 1% reductions, but that's economy-wide. This is a sector-specific policy. So it's on pace to achieve its 10% reductions within the transportation sector, which is what it's designed to do. Okay. So the policy is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And the cost numbers are just kind of a bit outlandish to me. One of the big factors that you can do with the clean fuel standard is switch to not only biofuels, but also electric vehicles. And our electricity here is so much cheaper than it is in Washington or in California, and cleaner. And as a result, it's about half the cost, essentially, of what California is. So we absolutely should expect this policy to be much, much cheaper than it was in California. And you look at Oregon, a marketplace that's closer to us, it's less than a penny per gallon right now. So those cost numbers, it's easy to throw things out there, extrapolate them into the future, and say, oh, this is going to be a big cost number. But in practice, these bills have not led to major costs in California.
Briefly, if you could, Dana.
That is the exact opposite of what the California Legislative Analyst's Office said. They said it has added 16 cents a gallon to the cost of gasoline. And you know who that hurts the most? Working families. It's a regressive cost increase to those who can least afford to pay more. And it'd be great if we could all afford electric vehicles, but that's not a possibility for most Washingtonians. Washington families.
I want to make sure that I jump back on something you said a minute ago, this idea of trying to find some middle ground perhaps. It was interesting to me, the Western States Petroleum Association told the Seattle Times very recently a cap and trade type system, which was proposed in 2016, might be worth revisiting. I know Senator Carlisle's been talking about this. Is this the path ahead? Is that the right idea, a cap and trade idea?
Well, at Affordable Fuel Washington, we represent a broad coalition of farmers, small businesses, working families. But one thing I think we can all agree upon in our coalition is we definitely want policies that reduce carbon emissions. And there are members of our coalition who do support a cap and trade program. You know, in California, it's proven to be more effective than the low carbon fuel standard, which is 10 times more costly. So I think voters have spoken on this issue too. They want solutions that reduce carbon emissions, but don't put the cost burden squarely on the backs of Washington families.
Is this the middle ground here, Greg? Something with a cap and trade? I just wanted to throw that out.
Well, our organization, Carbon One, is a big fan of economy-wide pricing mechanism. Cap and trade is one of them, fee and dividends another. There's a lot of different approaches. You're going to get lower cost reductions with an economy-wide price on carbon because there are cheaper reductions in the electric sector and the building sector. But in Washington State, the vast majority of our emissions come from the transportation sector. So we need to tackle the transportation sector. Yes, they're the harder, more expensive costs, but we need to do it. And we have an opportunity to be a leader as a result of doing that. We can have the biofuel manufacturers. We can have the new electric technology. So we can really create jobs and be leading the rest of the world with that job creation.
Thank you very much for that. We need to wrap up this segment. This has been great, but quick. I appreciate it. Greg, final words for the state legislature as they're dealing with these issues.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a great policy. It's a progressive, low-cost, equitable policy that is going to advance one of the more difficult sectors, getting the pollution from our fuels reduced. So there'll be less local air pollution, less asthma, less respiratory disease, just a litany of advantages that come with it, be it from jobs to reduce pollution. And the costs really are quite insignificant if you look at things like, you know, just 6 out of the 10 highest profit margins of any refineries in the world are here in Washington State. 6 out of 10 in those markets. In Seattle, they're charging, I believe it's 83 cents a profit margin per gallon. So when we're arguing about what will probably be a few cents per gallon and the oil companies are making 83 cents in profit margin, I don't buy it.
Dana, the 45-second version to wrap up, please.
You know, this is a failed policy in California. It's a reason that our state legislature has rejected it not once, but twice, and it's why it deserves to be rejected again. It's costly, regressive, and unworkable. It puts the cost burden squarely on the backs of Washington families, especially those who can least afford to pay more for basic necessity as gasoline. You know, we all need to drive to work. We all have to take our kids to school. An added cost of up to 16 cents a gallon, which could increase adding on to 71 cents, that's a real cost. It's why the measure deserves to be defeated for the third time.
And we'll see what happens here. Thank you both for your input here.
Thank you.
And we will be right back. And we are switching gears to talk about Olympia's plans for a 100% carbon-free energy grid. To do that, we have with us Adam Maxwell. He is Government Relations Director for Audubon, Washington. And we have George Caan, Executive Director of the Washington Public Utility Districts Association. Thanks for being here. Here we go. Overall thoughts to start. And Adam, I'll start with you. Senate Bill 5116 would establish this 100% carbon-free energy grid by the year 2045. What does this mean? Why is this needed? How do utilities transition into something like this?
Yeah, I mean, we are in a transformative moment right now. I mean, we know that within the next 10 to 15 years, we need to make rapid transformations into a clean energy economy. And to do that, we're going to have to move more and more of our transportation sector, more and more of our building sector, and more of our general energy usage onto the energy grid. And in order to reach the kind of emissions reductions that we know that we need to reach if we're going to create a stable climate and protect future generations, reduce pollution, help the most vulnerable communities, we know that we're going to have a 100% clean grid if we're going to make sure that those transportation options, those building options, are going to be truly decarbonized in the next few decades.
Okay, thank you for that. George, give us an idea of what impact this bill would have on local public utility districts, please.
Sure, thanks again for inviting me here. So in the state of Washington, we have two basic types of electric utilities. We have investor-owned utilities like Puget Sound Energy, and then utilities we refer to as consumer-owned. Seattle City Light is a municipal utility. I represent public utility districts. There are 28 throughout the state. They are over 90% clean, and they contribute about 1.4% of the carbon emissions of the state. So something that we have in common, consumer-owned utilities and investor-owned utilities, we look at the issue similarly in relationship to the affordability and reliability of the system. So the lens that we use to look at the clean energy proposals are through those two factors, distillation. So our job has been to look at the clean energy standard as it's moved through the legislature and to try to compromise, make changes that continue to support affordability and reliability to those.
And I think, and we're going to dive into that in just a little
You
bit.
bet.
Maybe I can throw it back to Adam
You
here
bet.
because I think there is this underlying concept, and I heard it during some of the different testimony that's been happening in Olympia here. This might somehow hurt our state's utilities. They're running a very clean system. We heard George talk about that. A lot of hydropowers in the mix. If solar and wind, for example, get big tax breaks, the argument would say that's unfair. It would essentially take resources away from a hydro system that's working really well and really cleanly.
Yeah, I mean, Washington State is really blessed with a robust hydro system, which has gotten us about 65% of the way to a clean energy future, and you know, roughly about 10% of other clean energy sources get us at about 75%. You know, there's been a robust stakeholder process throughout the generation of this bill and the conversations about it. And I know that the public utilities have been a part of that process, the investor-owned utilities, as well as you know, labor, environmental groups, and folks that are you know, really focused on the most vulnerable populations, ensuring that they have low-cost energy, and that Washington State continues to be a state where we're #1 in terms of affordability for our electricity system.
Does it hurt those PUDs though? How do you look at that with those hydro systems that are in place? When you say big tax breaks for these guys, I've heard so many PUDs say that's not fair.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, the way the bill is structured is that there's a real focus, and this is something that doesn't get enough attention, but there's a real focus on clean energy planning and finding the least cost alternatives to put into the integrated resource plans that utilities have been putting together for quite a while to ensure that as we transition, we're finding those least cost alternatives, including incremental improvements to hydroelectricity, including you know, a rapidly falling prices for solar energy, for solar plus storage, for wind energy.
Yeah, okay. So a lot of different pieces there. George, maybe I can try to put the brass tacks on here. Where do you think utility rates go if 5116 passes?
So some utility rates will probably go up depending on their profile, their portfolio. The bill itself,
types of energy
in terms of energy, for instance, our energy resources are primarily renewable: hydropower, wind, solar. Very little thermal, gas, very little gas-powered generation in our portfolios. Other utilities that have legacy thermal, coal, gas, it'll probably be more expensive for them to transition. However, there is a cost cap in the legislation that provides a protection on the affordability. And then for the PUDs that have hydropower resources, like in Chelan County, Grant County, historically we've not been able to use those resources to support an increased carbon reduction. This bill, as we've worked it through, it didn't start off that way, but as we worked it through, today you can use, in this bill, passed as it currently written, you could use your hydropower resources to support electric vehicle charging stations.
I see.
So if you take your renewable energy and you use it to help reduce carbon in the transportation sector, then you're actually using that hydro in a valuable way to make a difference, as opposed to just buying renewable resources you do not need to serve your customers.
Got it. Adam, your point on this.
Yeah, and I mean, George has a great point there, and you know, it's a reason, I know we're talking about SB 5116 here, but it's a really important reason that we're also, at least at Audubon, Washington, supporting bills like HB 1110, Clean Fuel Standard, getting more and more of those vehicles onto the utilities, into the utilities rate profile, ensuring that we are electrifying vehicles and that we're using clean hydroelectricity and accessing markets for other clean electricity in other parts of the West to really power this transformation.
Got it. And Adam, just briefly, Senator Erickson said in our setup piece, having a 100% carbon-free electrical grid in our state would have no impact on climate change. He's saying, let's make sure China's cleaned up. This is a bad use of resources. Can you touch briefly on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, I'd start by looking around the country. I mean, you look at Hawaii and California have already passed 100% clean electricity standards. Now, we're not going to get any electrons from Hawaii, that's for sure. Absent any transformational power
technology,
lines. Yeah, but California, we absolutely can. Seattle City Light has decided to join the energy imbalance market and actually be able to procure clean electricity from California. You also look at New Mexico. New Mexico just passed about a week ago their own clean electricity standard. And states around the country are passing these standards.
I see.
Which means that, and then there's actually really good provisions in this bill to explore how we can better integrate into those markets and how we can better assess what are the transmission capacity issues that we need to access those markets and to make sure that our utilities are tapping into the cleanest possible, most affordable energy.
And George, this feels like the bigger picture that Senator Carlisle was talking about. Everyone needs to do their part in this fight against climate change. That includes utilities. And this really speaks to me about this time when federal funding cuts are happening to environmental programs, certainly in our state. Our state needs to be a climate leader. Utilities have to be a part of that effort. Do you agree?
I do, and we have. So for over 30 years, back since the passage of the Northwest Power Planning Council, the Power Act, we have invested in energy efficiency. This portion of the country, the state of Washington, has been a leader in building codes, building standards, appliance efficiencies, market transformation. We have been a leader, and we continue to be a leader. Part of our legacy is that we all have this hydropower resource. And historically, the energy policies over the last decade have really not recognized the value of hydropower. So the transformative issue in this policy debate is the true recognition, with the support of the environmental community, that hydropower plays a valuable role both in reducing carbon and also ensuring that the system remains reliable because of the ability to use hydropower.
Very important point there. We need to wrap this up. Thank you for a great but lightning fast conversation here. Adam, final thoughts for legislatures ahead?
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning, this is a transformational moment, and it has to be. We absolutely can do this, and you know, we have a policy that's gone through a robust stakeholder process to be the best possible policy, and we'll see where it goes in the next few weeks. And you know, session wraps up in about a month. But really, what I'm most excited about is that this kicks off an even more robust stakeholder process in which Utilities and Transportation Commission, the Department of Commerce, other stakeholders are going to be involved in finding an affordable, reliable, and clean way to decarbonize our economy over the next 20 years.
George, final thoughts, please.
So my final thought would be, over the last 10 years or so, we've tried to develop policies that will work and compromise. It's been very difficult. We haven't gotten a lot. Today we have a process that has really resulted in something that I believe we can live with and makes good sense for the state. The challenge for the legislature and for us is to keep the process in the middle. Don't get dragged to one side or the other in attempting to get things that people want at the end. Let's work to get the good compromise legislation that currently is in play, and let's make it across the finish line without the kind of debate that has forestalled us getting a good compromised legislation in the past.
Thank you very much. And I know there's a lot ahead with this, so I appreciate your input here, and we will be right back.
Increased fees is never a good idea, but if it's going to help with the overall environment, then yeah.
There needs to be a limit. We can't pay too much.
Taxation is not an answer. It seems like we're a little tax crazy here.
To take care of the environment, we all have to chip in.
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter and give us your feedback.
Before we close today, it's time for our weekly CIO poll. Do you support a new low-carbon fuel standard in Washington? Yes, no, or are you undecided? We want to know what you think. Cast your vote and weigh in with your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next time, the fight over extending light rail to West Seattle. To tunnel or not to tunnel? We dig into that debate next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.